It started with a voice that cut through the cabin like a blade. "This is your last warning. Move to the back of the plane or I'll call security." The flight attendant's tone dripped with condescension. But the man she targeted didn't flinch. Dressed in a crisp navy suit, Charles Bennett, an unassuming African-American gentleman in his late 40s, met her glare with a calm that silenced the surrounding whispers. "I've already told you," he said gently. "I'm not moving." Passengers shifted uncomfortably. Some looked away, others reached for their phones, sensing something more was unfolding. What they didn't realize was that this wasn't just a dispute over seating, it was a collision between prejudice and quiet power. Because Charles wasn't just any passenger, he was the billionaire owner of the jet they were flying on. And in that moment, when the world expected silence or submission, he chose something else, to stand in quiet defiance. This wasn't about status, it was about dignity, about what happens when someone you underestimate decides to let the truth speak louder than assumptions. Charles didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue, he simply stood firm, because respect isn't something you beg for. It's something you command with presence, integrity, and truth. The hum of jet engines and the clink of champagne glasses filled the cabin of the private aircraft as sunlight danced off its gold-trimmed interiors. To most on board, this was just another luxury flight, an indulgence they'd paid handsomely for. But for one man sitting quietly by the window, this was something else entirely. Charles Bennett, dressed in a tailored navy blue suit, carried himself with understated grace. In his late 40s, with salt and pepper temples and a calm, thoughtful gaze, he blended in by design. What no one knew, yet, was that Charles wasn't just another passenger. He was the man who owned the jet, and the airline. But to Lauren Monroe, the lead flight attendant, none of that mattered. All she saw was a black. "Excuse me, sir," she said sharply. Charles looked. A hush fell. Lauren's tone harsh. Charles didn't raise his voice. He didn't move. Instead, he spoke with a quiet dignity that silenced the cabin. "I'm not moving, and I suggest you." In that, and the truth, it was about to take flight. Lauren Monroe had dealt with her share of difficult passengers, but something about Charles Bennett unnerved her. It wasn't his calmness or his composure. It was the way he refused to flinch. The way he met her gaze with unshakable confidence. As if he knew something she didn't. And he did. But Lauren, caught in the grip of her own assumptions, didn't see it. Instead, she turned to Grace, the junior attendant, escort him to the back. Now, Grace froze. Her eyes darted to Charles, then to the manifest near the cockpit door. She hesitated, every instinct told her to double-check. But Lauren's glare stopped her cold. With visible reluctance, Grace moved forward, unsure of what to say. "Think carefully," Charles said quietly, as she stepped closer. "You're about to escalate something that should never have started." Lauren scoffed, her voice rising. "You're not supposed to be here. Don't make this worse for yourself." The cabin had gone silent. The businessman across the aisle narrowed his eyes. A woman in pearls leaned closer to her husband, whispering with concern. Every passenger now understood. This was no longer about a seat. It was about something deeper. Something raw. Charles, still seated, reached slowly for his phone. He typed something with purpose and set it gently on the armrest. "You're making a mistake," he said. Lauren's face flushed. "You can't threaten me." "I'm not threatening," he replied calmly. "I'm documenting." The tension broke like a dam. Passengers began to murmur. Some reached for and Lauren. The truth was now in motion. And this flight, once just another luxury journey, was about to become a turning point. As Charles Bennett remained seated, dignified and composed, the energy in the cabin shifted. The quiet hum of the engines was now a backdrop to something far more electric, witnesses watching not just a confrontation, but a revelation in the making. Lauren Monroe, still clinging to her authority, paced down the aisle, tray in hand. She wore her professionalism like armor, but every step betrayed her agitation. When she returned to Charles's row, he politely asked for water. Her response was clipped and cold. "I'll get to you when I can." She walked past him without a glance. A few rows back, the businessman's eyes narrowed. The older couple exchanged knowing glances. And Grace, the younger flight attendant, watched everything in quiet discomfort, her hands twitching at her sides. Then came the moment that would tip everything. Charles, adjusting in his seat, extended a leg slightly into the aisle. It was a natural motion, graceful, unassuming, But Lauren, either distracted or deliberately cruel, veered into his leg. Her tray wobbled, a glass of sparkling water tipped. It splashed across his slacks and onto the cabin floor. Gasps rippled from the passengers. And yet, Charles didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse. Instead, he calmly dabbed at the spill, then met Lauren's glare with a tone as steady as it was unshakable. "You walked into me," he said, "and all I asked was the same respect you give everyone else. If that's too much, perhaps you're the one who doesn't belong here." The words echoed, quiet, powerful, undeniable, but Lauren snapped. Her voice shook. "You think you can talk to me like that?" And in a single reckless moment, she raised her hand, then struck him across the face. The slap rang out like thunder in the cabin. Phones went up. Grace gasped. The businessman half rose from his seat. Even the nosy woman in pearls shrank back. But Charles didn't move. He straightened slowly, hands still calm in his lap, and with the air of a man who knew exactly who he was. He said 6 words that chilled the room. "You just made the worst mistake." And in that instant, everyone knew, it was no longer her plane. The atmosphere inside the jet had shifted from casual luxury to charged silence. No one spoke, no one moved. The sting of the slap still lingered in the air, visible on Charles Bennett's cheek. But even more so in the stunned expressions of the passengers. And yet, Charles didn't retaliate. He didn't yell, didn't threaten. He simply sat upright, his posture regal, his eyes locked on Lauren Monroe with a calm that felt heavier than fury. "I've been patient," he said, his voice steady, "but you crossed a line." Lauren's jaw tightened. "You've been nothing but disruptive since you boarded." But her voice lacked conviction now. Her words stumbled over the rising doubt in her own authority. And as Charles leaned in slightly, still seated, his words, soft but weighted, cut through the tension like a blade. "You'll regret that." From the back of the cabin, Grace stood frozen. She had witnessed every word, every glare, and for too long, she had swallowed her voice. But not this time. With trembling fingers, she stepped away and made a quiet phone call. "It's Grace," she whispered. "We have a situation." She returned to her post, heart pounding but gaze firm. Across the aisle, a gray-haired businessman frowned and leaned forward. "Is everything all right?" he asked gently. Charles nodded. "Thank you, I'm fine." Lauren, overhearing, snapped. "Sir, please don't encourage this disruption." The man didn't flinch. "From where I'm sitting, Mom, you're the disruption." Her cheeks flushed red with anger and embarrassment. She turned back to Charles. But the momentum was no longer hers. The judgment of the cabin was shifting. The whispers now carried weight. Eyes were no longer curious, they were critical. And then it happened. Charles picked up his phone and typed with calm precision. He set it down beside him with intention. His message sent. Lauren's eyes flickered to the phone, a sudden knot forming in her chest. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice brittle. Charles leaned back. "You'll find out soon enough." A single sentence, but the passengers felt the tremor beneath it. The tide had turned. Lauren had no idea who she was dealing with. But soon, the world would. The hush inside the cabin was no longer just silence, it was anticipation. Every passenger, every crew member, even the hum of the engines seemed to pause. The tension was thick enough to taste. All eyes now gravitated toward Charles Bennett and the glowing screen of his phone resting on the armrest. Suddenly, from the front of the aircraft, the cockpit door opened with purpose. The pilot stepped out, tall, composed, but visibly uneasy. He scanned the cabin, his eyes settling on Lauren Monroe. "Miss Monroe," he said, his voice formal, clipped, "I need you to step aside." Lauren blinked. "What?" "I'm handling the situation." The pilot's gaze slid toward Charles. Then back to her. "I've just received word from corporate. The owner of this jet is on board. And it's Mr. Bennett." The air shifted, shocked gasps rippled like thunder through the cabin. The nosy socialite gasped audibly. "He owns the plane," she whispered to her partner. The businessman who had defended Charles gave a knowing nod. "I suspected as much," he murmured. Lauren, meanwhile, stood frozen, the color drained from her face as if every ounce of certainty had been stripped away. "No, that's not possible," she stammered. "There must be some mistake." But no one corrected the pilot. No one needed to. Moments later, the soft purr of tires on tarmac echoed through the fuselage. A sleek black SUV had pulled up beside the plane. 2 assistants in tailored suits ascended the stairs with swift, Practiced grace. They walked past Lauren without so much as a glance. "Mr. Bennett," one of them said with deference. "Everything is ready for your review." Lauren's knees nearly buckled. Charles stood slowly, adjusting his blazer. His movements were fluid, deliberate, a man entirely in control. Then, for the first time since the ordeal began, he addressed the entire cabin. "My name is Charles Bennett. I'm the CEO of this airline and the owner of this aircraft." A stunned silence fell. "I watched how I was treated today. And so did all of you." He turned to Lauren, whose eyes were wide with dread. "And now, we're going to have a conversation about accountability." The reckoning had begun. As Charles Bennett stepped off his own private jet, he didn't boast. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. There was a calm dignity in the way he moved, measured, composed, resolute. His assistants opened the door to the sleek black SUV waiting on the tarmac. But Charles's gaze remained fixed on the cabin behind him, the place where judgment had turned into stunned silence, and prejudice into deep reflection. Later that evening, in a televised interview, Charles spoke not about his wealth, nor about the humiliation he had endured. Instead, he said something simple but unforgettable. Respect is a right, not a reward. That, right there, is the heart of this story. Don't ever judge someone based on how they look, what they wear, or where they sit, because the person you dismiss today might be the one building a better world for you tomorrow. Charles didn't just defend himself. He stood up for everyone who has ever been looked down upon. And in doing so, he reminded us all of something profound. True strength isn't loud, it's quiet, steady, and grounded in truth. If this story moved you, if you believe that dignity should never depend on appearances, drop a comment below and tell us how you've stood up for respect in your own life. What would you have done if you were in Charles's seat? Hit like if you believe kindness and respect should always come first. And don't forget to subscribe, because stories like these are more than just content. They're reminders of the kind of world we all deserve.